Well, another anniversary. 30 years ago, one of Australia's best-loved children's picture books was published. It's Possum Magic, a tale about Grandma Poss, who with her bush magic makes a little possum called Hush invisible. What starts out as a fine idea to protect Hush from other bush animals becomes a problem for Hush, who, well, just wants to be seen. Possum Magic is Australia's best-selling children's book ever. It's had sales of more than 4 million copies. Mem has written around 35 books, including Time for Bed and 10 Little Fingers and 10 Little Toes, and she's a great champion of childhood literacy, and she joins me now from our Adelaide studios. Welcome and congratulations on this anniversary, Mem.
Thank you, Michael. It's certainly birthday month, isn't it?
It certainly is. So you dedicated Possum Magic to your daughter Chloe, who is now a minister in the South Australian government. Did you write the book for her?
I did. It was absolutely for her. My husband is English and I'm Australian in spite of my accent. I was born in Melbourne. I grew up outside Australia, which is why my accent, sounds weird. And I wanted our daughter to identify as Australian. I also wanted my husband to be very happy here and to settle. You know, we came back as migrants. I came back as a migrant even though I had an Australian passport. And when you came as a 10-pound pom, which we did from England, you had to stay here for 2 years. And I understand now why, because if you had been able to leave after 2 weeks or 3 months or something, a lot of people from the culture shock would have gone back home. And I think I wrote it really because I wanted him to be happy here, and he has been. And I wanted her to identify as an Australian because I very strongly identified as an Australian, even though I had grown up in Africa. So there were a whole lot of reasons why the book was written, but those are a couple of them.
Did you feel also a kind of nationalistic urge to create a children's book that was full of marsupials?
Yes, in fact, a sort of more of a rage even than an urge. Excuse me, I felt very angry when I came back to Australia about the cultural cringe. I came back in 1970, and because of my upbringing, because of my 2 Australian parents inculcating Australian culture into their daughters, I came back thinking that Australia was the most marvellous place in the world, that everything that Australians did was wonderful, that all the plants and animals were perfect, the cars were wonderful, the beaches were everything, the food was fantastic. And I came back and found that Australia didn't feel that about itself. And I think in the latter drafts of Possum Magic, because I rewrote it over 5 years, excuse me, in the latter drafts of Possum Magic, I just became more and more enraged that there weren't really Australian books around for my Australian child. She was, immersed in English children's literature, immersed in American children's literature, but in the early 70s, the amount of children's literature, modern Australian children's literature available for little kids was minimal. I mean, we could always go back to Blinky Bill and Snugglepot and Cuddle Pie and books like that, but they weren't right for her. They just weren't right for that generation. So I wrote the book in a kind of Australian rage. I was just xenophobically, just on a wave. It was hysterical. I just thought I have to write, all the Australian animals, all the Australian foods, everything that I can possibly put into the book to make it a rah-rah Australian book. And Michael, as a result, it was rejected many times by Australian publishers as being too Australian.
Is that what they said? Too Australian?
Yes, that's the situation we were in.
And in
the late 70s, early 80s. That's the situation we were in.
Does that mean too Australian because there would be no
sell overseas?
Overseas, yeah.
Yep.
Well, things haven't changed that much, have they? I mean, we still make television and films that then get remade overseas. It's very hard to tell Australian stories overseas.
Shocking. It's shocking because what the publishers of Possum Magic said eventually, the 10th publisher who finally took the book, said, we don't care about Australians, overseas sales, because we know that this book is going to sell in Australia in such quantities that overseas sales won't matter. So bless them for their foresight.
So you've sold
But
millions of copies.
But neither they nor I nor Julie Vivas, the genius illustrator of the book, realised at all what it would become. Not one of us had an inkling of what this book would become.
I wonder how tall a pile of 4 million copies of Possum Magic would be. Someone could work that out for us. How high up in the air would a pile of 4 million copies... I mean, that must be huge. Would that be...
It is pretty big. I try to explain it to little children when I'm in schools as probably, covering the floor of 4 football fields. You could put them out on 4 football fields and they'd cover them. The kids' eyes go round with wonder, as indeed do mine, Michael. I was just coming upstairs yesterday, having done something with Possum Magic, and thinking, has this book got anything to do with me? I can't believe that I have anything to do with it, because it's got such a life of its own now. It's out there. It's a phenomenon. It's still in hardback after 30 years. There's no other book that is still in hardback except perhaps the Bible. After 30 years, usually books go into paperback after 2 years. So it's just a phenomenon, and I'm very grateful to have had a little part in it. Well,
the pictures must have a lot to do with it as well, because they are gorgeous.
The pictures in a picture book are always 50% of the book. Unfortunately, the writer of the book is always the one, given the credit, given the interviews, given the publicity. It's always better known than the illustrator, and it's not right. It's really not right, because Julie Vivas's illustrations are, probably even more than 50% important in Possum Magic. They are so exquisite. They're so beautifully done. They're so charming and heartwarming, and exquisitely painted. I mean, the art itself is just amazing.
And in the latest edition, beautifully reproduced, the colours are so amazingly vivid.
Aren't they great? They really are fantastic. And of course, that's to do with digital now. Excuse me. We can do lots of clever things with digital publishing these days. The original paintings of Possum Magic probably wouldn't reproduce very well because they faded.
Now, you say it took 5 years to write. Lovely book though it is, I can't actually believe it would take you 5 years. I mean, in some ways, there's so little of it, if you see what I mean. It's a pavlova. It's a beautiful thing, but there's not a lot to it. Can you explain to me how it took you 5 years to write a book that's, I don't know, is it 500 words long?
Yes, 512 words. It was rejected 9 times over 5 years, and in between each of those rejections, it was rewritten. So I wasn't rewriting all the time. I think one of the very good things... Excuse me, I'm just going to cough.
Okay. Mem Fox is just coughing. This is
I'm just cough.
I'll tell them who you are. This is Books and Arts Daily on RN, and I'm talking to Mem Fox, who's got a frog in her throat, which is just the thing.
She's just an ageing asthmatic. That's her problem.
And we're talking we're talking about the 30th anniversary of one of Australia's best-loved picture books, which is Possum Magic, which Mem Fox wrote. Sorry, Mem, on you go.
And so, what were we talking about? I'm sorry, the coughing and the ancient, asthmatic has thrown my train of thought.
Let's talk about the African dimension to your life.
Oh, could we? No, I've remembered.
Oh, okay.
I think that we were talking about why it took 5 years to write. And one of the things about Possum Magic, of course, I've had to talk about its genesis and the writing of it over the last 30 years. But one of the things that I keep coming back to when I read it to children is the fact that they are spellbound by the reading. And I ask myself why that is. And I think it's partly because I took so long over the writing of it. I made sure that every comma was in the right place. I made sure that every full stop was in the right place. I made sure that between commas and full stops and capital letters, all the syllables were in the right place. And the reason I was able to do that, particularly I think in the first paragraph of Possum Magic, which was rewritten, just the first paragraph was rewritten 23 times. I went over it and over it and over it, is because I grew up on a mission in Africa a long time ago, of course, because I'm now 67. And I grew up with the King James Version of the Bible, which is perfectly written, whether you believe a word of it or not. It is an absolutely perfectly written document. And the syllables are always in the right place. The commas are always in the right place. It's a beautiful piece of literature. I then went to drama school in London, and I heard then and learnt by heart the most beautiful language ever written in English, and that went into the marrow of my bones. I then, I continued to read wonderful literature. I'm thinking of the first page of The Grapes of Wrath, which is about to be one of your books, or our books, as it were, those of us reading those books on Radio National. The first page of The Grapes of Wrath, the first page of Pride and Prejudice. I'm absolutely steeped in beautiful writing and beautiful literature. And I think that because I had so long to write Possum Magic, I was able to bring that knowledge. And I suppose there must be some talent there, although that's always embarrassing to admit. As an Australian, you can't do it in our culture. But certainly being immersed in great literature helped me to get the syllabification right. And I think people ignore that to their peril when they're writing for children.
Mem, it would be lovely to hear you demonstrate some of your syllabification. Could you read a little to us?
Sure. This is the beginning. Once upon a time, but not very long ago, deep in the Australian bush lived two possums. Their names were Hush and Grandma Poss. Grandma Poss made bush magic. She made wombats blue and kookaburras pink. She made dingoes smile and emus shrink. But the best magic of all was the magic that made Hush invisible. That's the beginning of it.
The hair standing up on the back of my neck. You must have read that hundreds of times. Do you know it off by heart?
Thousands of times, yes, I do know it off by heart. I think I could do it with my eyes closed, underwater, really. I think I would be able to recite. I'll be able to recite Possum Magic even when I'm demented. It's that sort of, it's really, really deeply in my brain.
How
I have no intention.
How irritating that will be for the other people in the home.
It will be very annoying for them.
Now, you are a professional at all of this because you were an associate professor in literacy studies at Flinders University in South Australia. So
yes.
Perhaps you could give us some advice, those of us who get to read to small children. Are there things we need to get right when we're reading to little kids?
Oh, I think we've got to be happy. I dread the word expressive because then people, think that they have to have some kind of talent in order to read to children. But there is a sort of dullness to some people's voices where you think, oh, do cheer up, just cheer up. Just get a little bit upbeat here, just keep a smile in your voice and a sparkle in your eyes. Really, children don't mind how you read to them, particularly as long as you're with them. I mean, the whole point of reading to children, not the whole point, but one of the major points is to attach ourselves to our children and for them to attach themselves to us and also to the books that we're sharing in a beautiful, beautiful, trio of gorgeousness. The book, the child and the adult. It's the purest heaven. It's so, so gorgeous. It makes you I feel happier when I'm reading to my grandson than I feel at any other time. It is the most magical experience.
And then when we're reading to children, are we also trying to encourage them to learn to read?
We are not encouraging them to learn to read. We are making them learn to read. It's just happening. We're not doing anything special. We're just reading to them. But by doing that reading, we are setting them up for learning to read easily and happily and quickly at school. Children who have not been read to prior to going to school will find learning to read very difficult. Children who have had 10 minutes a day, every single day, 3 stories or the same story over and over and over and over and over and over again will end up learning to read very quickly and happily and easily. So within the joy and the happiness of reading to children, we are providing them with language development, which is essential for learning to read. We're providing them with an educational future that is going to be happy and successful. We're we're developing their brains, we're developing their social skills. Thousands of things are happening when we read to children. As a literacy person, I am focusing, of course, on the education, but there are doctors, pediatricians, social workers, psychologists and speech pathologists who are all on the same bandwagon. Please, please read to your children, read in a lively way and read with love, not duty.
Now, so many books for children today are based on television programs, the programs the preschoolers might watch, I suppose Thomas the Tank Engine,
Yes.
In the Night Garden. Has television changed the way that children read?
Not at all. No, not at all. I think television has its place, and the books that come out of television are often the original books are excellent. The original books of Thomas the Tank Engine are superb, absolutely superb. Characterization is hysterical, wildly sexist, of course, unbelievably sexist, but that was in that age. Excuse me. But books that come out of television, I think, are that if television comes out of books, the television's terrific. If books come out of television, then, they're dreadful because they're not written by people who know how to write. They're written by people who know how to make money out of publishing. And those books don't last in children's lives. They will not say at 17, when they see a book arising out of a television program, "Oh, look at that. I remember that. Oh, please, I know I'm 17. Let's buy a copy. I just remember it so well." It's not going to happen. It just will not happen because those people don't know how to write.
I feel like that about the Just So stories by Rudyard Kipling, which aren't Australian, but they are the work that resonates with me.
And I cannot wait to read the Just So stories to my grandson. I cannot wait to read a lot of Rudyard Kipling to my grandson. I think they're so special. So special. Oh, and I remember them so much as a child. The emotion, the fear, the terror, all very important in a safe situation. People are frightened now of frightening children with the books that they read. But if children are not frightened in a safe situation and learn to be frightened and learn to get over the fright, something's missing from their upbringing. It's just not right. It's not psychologically right that they should be utterly safe all the time. It gives them a false impression of the world.
The elephant's child stood on what he thought was a log of wood, but it was really the crocodile.
On the great grey, green, greasy banks of
the Limpopo River. That's right. So you've written more than 40 children's books. Which are closest to your heart, Mim?
Which are closest to my heart?
Yeah.
It's like kind of comparing watermelons with passion fruit, really, because they're so different. It's very, very hard to say which are favourites. My second book, Wilfred Gordon MacDonald Partridge, I think is probably the best in terms of a plot line beginning and ending in the same place. And the structure of that book, most adults, especially adults with elderly parents, can't read it without weeping, but children see something completely different in that book. So I love that book, and also because Wilfred Gordon MacDonald Partridge was my father's full name. So to have that on the front of a book and to have that as a book that's loved does make me feel that that's a very special book. I just can't. Because I could start now raving on about my own books and say which ones I love and for what reason. And you can't do that as an Australian. You can't do that, Michael.
Well, Mem
You just
Fox,
can't do that.
No.
You can't boast.
No.
It would be dreadful. So I'm hoping that this interview is coming to an end.
It's coming to an end, Mem. We've been boasting for you. Thank you for joining us. It's been a lovely, lovely conversation.
Thank you.
Mem Fox. Possum Magic turns 30 this year, and it's published by Scholastic. This is Books and Arts Daily on RN.